Clare Daly.
Thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle, and I'd like to start by complimenting Deputy O'Sullivan, who, like her predecessor, Deputy Tony Gregory, has really been to the forefront in this state in raising issues of animal health and welfare, and I very much salute her in that regard. And I also want to acknowledge those who are present in the gallery from all the multitude of groups around this state, many of whom have travelled very long distances to be with us tonight. They're by and large volunteers, people who do it for no other reason but love of animals, and it's their expertise and their experience which says that the regulations and the legislation which we have in place at the moment, despite maybe the best intentions of those who brought it in, simply are not working. I'm quite sure they've much better things to be doing with their lives than being in here, but they're here to say that we need to change and that we're not doing enough. I think I want to start by saying let's step back and look at this. Man's inhumanity to man is often mirrored in our mistreatment of animals. As far as I'm concerned, it's a consequence of a society which commodifies animals for human profit. It's as simple as that. I was fully expecting somebody to get up and say, "Oh, sure, look, there's far more important issues out there. Why are we wasting our time on this?" I think it's illustrative that nobody did say that. I think that gives an indication of how animal welfare is a very serious issue, which everybody acknowledges. And there's a couple of reasons for it. I think, firstly, a society which is cruel to animals is symptomatic of a deeper malaise that exists and extends to a mistreatment of other vulnerable groups in society. It's also scientifically demonstrated that those who exploit and demonstrate wanton and gratuitous cruelty towards animals often end up displaying similar features towards their fellow human beings. So we in Independence for Change make no apology for raising animal welfare and indeed animal rights issues, and we will continue to do that. I very much welcome Maureen's motion as an animal lover, as a vegetarian, as someone who moved the first motion on a county council 10 years ago now to prohibit the use of wild animals in circuses, and it's an awful indictment that that still hasn't been sorted out 10 years on. I think the motion is a very timely reminder of the cruelty that goes on. I think it's also a very straightforward motion. Its intent is to raise the standards of animal welfare and protection in this country. Not just domestic animals, animals in captivity, animals in the wild, those being bred for sport, even despicably blood sports, those that are being used for experiments or being bred for their fur or indeed for their meat. And, you know, we could literally be here all night talking about any one aspect of those. There is no end to the cruelty that is demonstrated, and I can't deal with all of the issues. But let's for a minute look at the issues of the use of animals in farming and the use of animals in sport, which in many ways could be viewed as legitimate cruelty, or people who would be absolutely horrified to hear of a story of a gurrier throwing a cat onto a bonfire has no problem with some of the exploitation that goes on in those spheres. And I don't say that lightly or to be critical to those people, but we as a society have to step back and look at those issues. Deputy Fitzmaurice said farmers love their animals. I accept that. Of course farmers love their animals. It's their means to their livelihood. Did people in Ireland years ago love their children? When they sent them to Magdalen laundries because they were pregnant outside marriage, when they slapped them for being bold in school. Society changes and evolves, and we have different standards of culture and society addressing matters when we learn more as a society. And in that sense, it's not a question of slagging off farmers, but we do need to step back and look at how we use animals. Now, I can say it, confidently, I suppose, because I am a vegetarian. But there's no economic or environmental sense in eating meat. And it's interesting that Deputy Healy-Rae, who didn't bother to stay, has raised issues because he denies climate change. But there's no doubt about it. The amount of cattle that's been raised now is a huge contributing factor to climate change and emissions and so on. And we as a society are going to have to address that. It's also the case that the misuse of animals in what we call sport. Is it true that horses, when they're gainfully employed in our studs or whatever, are treated like royalty? The examples given by others that they have a better setup than homeless people. Yes, they do when they're productively employed, but when they're not, tough. And then the issues of drugs and all the rest as well is very much part of that. And we are saying, and in fairness, we said it to Minister Coveney at the time, that the Animal Health and Welfare Bill was good on paper. We suspected at the time that it would have limitations, and sadly this has proven to be the case. I would say the profile around issues of cruelty has been raised. We've had a number of interactions since the passing of the bill with members of An Garda Síochána who have tried to deal with issues of animal cruelty. In the main, I found them to respond very well to try and address the issues, but they haven't really been given the legislation to equip them to do that effectively. And, you know, I would like deputies to have a think about it in the way in which John Fitzgerald, in a letter to the papers, asked them today. I mean, those who give out and sort of correctly are appalled by, you know, animals found dead and starving on the sides of roads, or cats being shot with pellet guns or being thrown into fires, or dogs found with their ears hacked off and so on. And then you think it's okay that hare coursing's all right. I mean, a hunted fox or a coursed hare feels pain in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter to him that the person chasing him has a nice suit and a lot of money in his pocket. Is that any different to a death experienced by somebody who might throw you on a bonfire in an estate in Dublin? They don't suffer any less, and I would, without in any way being flippant, ask deputies to stand back and look at that certain double standards that exists. We often hear people who are horrified about greyhounds and how they're treated in other countries, but we've no problem in shipping there. And I put it to Deputy Fitzmaurice, if you sell a car to somebody who you know has been guilty of joyriding and killing people, then as far as I'm concerned you are responsible, and the analogy is exactly the same. So we wanted, in putting this motion forward, to challenge some of those views. Other deputies have made the point about the ISPCA, the amount of calls they've received, 16,000 calls last year. It shows how much citizens are engaged trying to deal with these issues. But 16 cases finalised in the court, and even at that the penalties imposed have been ridiculously low. And I want to look at that. I have no time. Deputy O'Sullivan dealt with issues of badger culling and so on, but I just want to briefly deal with the issue of badger baiting, which is patently illegal in this state. And as we're here tonight, it is going on. And it's absolutely reprehensible, cruel, inhumane activity, which involves the invasion of a badger's habitat by trained terriers who drag out the badger, usually grown men, who organise this horror show. There's a picture of one of them here with his balaclava and his military gear. I wouldn't like to cross him. I'm sure our NEPS officers and that certainly wouldn't like to cross him either. Generally, they pull out mother badgers who've recently given birth because their instinct is to protect their young, and they'll get a far better fight out of her as she fights for her life and to protect her cubs. And meanwhile, they stand around and they place bets on that activity. 30 years ago, Panorama highlighted what was going on in Ireland, a tourism in that type of barbarity. And today, 30 years on, it's still going on, with gangs in the Midland operating, criminal gangs, who in 2013 were arrested over incidents of badger baiting. In the 2 years before they were brought to court, they managed to polish and bring out an entirely professional operation, operating on Facebook, tracking badgers with GPS systems, and a network of betting and appalling videos going on. So by the time they came to court in 2015 and got their 3-month suspended sentence, the lads said good luck. 5 people with a 3-month suspended sentence, and went off to hone their badger baiting skills, which undoubtedly they're probably at tonight. And even Googling the internet will introduce you to some of their activities. So a patently illegal activity which our NEPS officers and our Gardaí are aware of and have tried to deal with. But God Almighty, what NEPS officer without a gun or an armoured car is going to go in and take on some of these thugs? They're not going to be able to deal with that. We need a lot more if you like, support for our NEPS officers and for our Gardaí in dealing with these activities. We don't have time, Ceann Comhairle. The fact that so many dogs are even bred to spend their lives participating in these blood sports is the other side of the equation, not to mind puppy farm and all the other barbarity that goes on. We will be continuing to raise these issues. It's clear the legislation is deficient, and I think the efforts of NGOs and people in the gallery to highlight these is very a positive aspect of those citizens, and one that we will certainly attempt to ape and copy.
Thank you, Deputy Daly, and I call Minister Clare to respond now. Minister.